Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. It's 10 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So if just do a sound check, if everyone could just put a little note in the chat to say that you can hear us, that would be great. So to say, welcome to February's webinar, and today we're going to be talking about awards. More specifically, everything you need to know about writing winning entries. And then equally importantly, what to do after you've won, what to do after you've been successful. But in time-honored tradition, we're going to start with a bit of housekeeping. I'm going to introduce Dan, who, for those of you who don't know, he's not been on one of our webinars before, keeps us on the straight and narrow. Dan, do you just want to talk and introduce yourself and let everyone know what we can expect today?
Yeah, sure thing. Hello, I'm Dan. Thank you, everybody, for confirming the sound check. I think that's probably the most answers we've ever got. I think everybody on the call answered that, so thank you for that. So I'm Dan, I'm Head of Branding and Design here at the Yardstick Agency, and today I'll be Phil's extremely glamorous assistant, which means I'll be doing two things. The first is making sure that everything's running smoothly and keeping us on track and on time. I suppose that's the most important thing. So if our sound cuts out or Phil catches fire or something, just let us know in the chat and we'll do what we can. The second thing is I'll be reading out your questions so that Phil and Lee can answer them. So if you're a webinar regular and looking at the list, quite a few of you are. As Phil mentions, you know that these sessions work better with plenty of input. So don't be afraid to get stuck in. We're not afraid to be challenged, and frankly, we like a good chat with you guys. So there are two ways you can do that. Either ask them in the chat function that everybody's familiar with because everybody's sound checked us, or the little Q&A box at the bottom there. I'll be monitoring both, and every now and then, where convenient, I'll be asking a few of those questions, and I'll be, saving a couple till the end as well to sweep any final ones up. So it's a safe space. There are no silly questions, I promise. Well, there are, but I guarantee if you're thinking it, somebody else is, so don't be shy. And a question we usually get asked, so I'll answer it first and foremost. We'll absolutely be sending a recording of this out after the session. So if you miss anything or want to revisit it, you absolutely can. So in the follow-up email that Phil sends across, there'll be a link to a YouTube video. So, you watch that at your leisure. So without further ado, let me introduce our special guest today, Lee Robertson of the financial services community Octo. I'm going to be cheeky and I'll start with the first question today. It'll be maybe the easiest you'll be asked, Lee. Could you tell us a little bit more about your career in financial services and what Octo does for those that don't know?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Dan. Morning, everyone. My career in financial services, crikey. I left the Royal Navy, I don't know, about 1990. I was going to be joining a department of the civil service, and they were mucking around with start dates. So back then, barrier to entry was much, much lower, and I ended up joining a direct sales company selling financial services products, and that's what it was, selling, commission-based. Good training, lasted about a year there, then went mortgage broking, then went bank assurance, and then by then I'd sort of worked out, I think, in my head that if I did everything probably the opposite the way those companies were doing it, I might have a decent chance of being a good independent financial advisor. So started to practice back then, sold it 5 years later to my business partner and started a fee-based financial planning practice, Investment Forum, sold that out to the rest of the team about 3.5 years ago and founded Octo at the same time, which Octo, for those who don't know, is a community which has a pretty singular aim, although there are 8, hence Octo, but it's to showcase good people, good thinking, good practice, hopefully leading to us all doing things a little bit better. Very much like this webinar. We curate and aggregate other people's content, plus we create our own, and we're forever interviewing good people and getting panel debates together and showing people a bit of the thinking that's going on across financial services. It's maybe a little bit different in that it's not just comprised of financial planners. There are wealth managers and paraplanners and investment professionals in there as well, marketing people. I know the Yardstick's a big supporter of Octo and what we do. So that's us in a nutshell. Membership is free. All of our CPD content is free. We're huge believers, because of, I guess, my background, we're huge believers, as I know Yardstick is, of the value of great financial advice and financial planning. So we We have a free membership and free CPD model. I think to date, something like over 600 videos featuring practitioners talking about what they do, why they do it, etc. So I'll shut up there because I'm moving into it.
Thank you, Lee. And in the follow-up email, we'll put a link to the sign-up page for Opto for those people who want to know more about it. And it's a fabulous form, and I can highly recommend it. So, awards. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, we are going to be talking about the 8 things you can do to create a winning entry. We're going to reveal, with Lee's help, the 5 things that really annoy judges and reduce your chance of winning. Then we're going to start talking about the awards that are worth entering and those which aren't, so it should be interesting to get Lee's views on that. And then, most importantly, the things you should do after you've been shortlisted and after you've won. Getting shortlisted, winning is not the end of your awards journey. There's a lot of work to do afterwards. And as Dan says, please do question us. If there's things that you want to know, please do put it in the chat, in the Q&A. Lee and I can hang around afterwards. We don't want anyone to leave today without having their question answered. Please provide comment as well, feedback. And as Dan says, we don't have all the answers, so we only get better by us getting challenged and developing and iterating our views as well. So if you think we've got something completely wrong, please do tell us. Lee and I are big enough boys to be able to take it. So without further ado, first things first, really, do we really need to be here? Lee, can't we just go and buy a table for an award, get drunk, go up and get our award because we bought the table? Isn't that how it works?
No, it's not. I see this a lot on the forums. I see it a lot on Twitter. I'm not saying that there aren't ways to get awards. And I'm a huge, I'm very against these award farms where you get these emails that turn up saying, oh, you've been specially selected. You are the leading financial planner in the UK from our desk-based research. Send us £3,500 and you can have a logo and a bit of plastic for your cupboard. So I'm so against those. It's untrue. And people get duped. And some of them have got great names. They look pretty good and they're very slick. There's even one, I think, called Parliamentary Review, and you think that somehow Parliament has suggested you're good at what you do. But in terms of mainstream financial services awards, the quality ones, you just can't do that. In fact, I've sat in judging chambers where judges are trying not to give awards out because they think the standard in that region has not been good, or all the calculations are wrong. And I know we're going to get into this later. So the short answer is no, you can't. The longer answer is there are awards around from awards forums that look pretty slick, and if you're that way inclined, you probably could. But I don't see the value of those at all because everyone knows who they are. Maybe your clients, but in the end, what's the point of getting a kind of a bauble just because you bought it?
And for you, Lee, what's the key benefits to the firm of entering and winning awards? What's the purpose?
Okay. For me, and probably my bona fides here, we were multi award because I had a very consistent approach to entering awards. Why did I set down that path? Because it's incredibly time consuming. The main benefits are, I think, it's a validator for clients. Definitely, they like those. We used to get when I was running my practice, I'm sure they still do, we got a lot of introductions from professional connections, solicitors and accountants. And it gave the solicitor or accountant something else to talk about, because very often solicitors particularly would usually recommend 3 firms that they liked. And it's looked like a differentiator. And they would say, we can recommend you to firm A, we really like those. We can recommend you to firm B, we really like those. And we can recommend you to firm C, and they've just won an award, by the way. And somehow it helped. It's a brand amplifier, I would say, and I know today's not about brand, but I would say it's a brand amplifier. It looks good on your website. It gives you lots of content ideas because and we'll get to this later, you promote it to your clients, etc. But for me, the benefits are, it allows you to battle test, and sorry, I'm ex-military, this always creeps in, but it allows you to battle test who you are, what you do, how you do it, how you promote it, because you think about all of that through the awards process as you collect your evidence, and it helps you tidy up bits and pieces. If they're asking for bits of evidence, you think, oh God, that's 2 years old, it needs a refresh. You have a kind of refreshing process going on all the time, particularly if you're entering multiple awards or you're doing it annually.
That's some great stuff there. And it's clear that entering the award and the actual process is as useful as the win itself. So if we've established that we can't just shortcut this by buying a table, and that it's worth doing, we probably should look at some of the ways to create a winning entry if it's worth doing. Otherwise, we've got a really short webinar. So let's continue. So for me, the first thing that an advisor, a planner or firm can do is select the right awards in the right categories. Now, I often see firms just see an award, it's a shiny new thing, and therefore they should enter it. And there isn't much due diligence on the actual award itself. So for me, we need to select the awards and categories that you have a chance of winning and are worth winning as well. I think this, Lee, goes back to your point of the award half. It's the ones that are worth winning. And for me, when we're helping firms to evaluate awards and evaluate categories to decide which ones they should enter, we'll have a look at the criteria. We'll have a look at the questions, and we also go back and look at previous winners. And previous winners helps us to advise the client on whether the award is worth winning, and just their chances of success as well. And we wouldn't immediately dismiss an award or a category because we don't think a firm can win it, because as Lee says, there's benefit in the process itself. But we will look at those three things: the criteria, the questions, and the previous winners, before advising a firm on whether they should enter. So I'm keen to know, Lee, when you were at Investment Quorum, how did you go about choosing the right awards to enter?
Okay, so it would depend what part of the business I was thinking about. And I guess it's probably worth dropping in right now that there is no shame in not entering awards. For firms that don't want to enter awards because they're too busy and they've got a steady stream of referrals from existing clients, etc., that's absolutely fine. I just happened to have a very competitive streak brought out when I was in the armed forces. But moving on to your actual question, how do you go about selecting the awards? Think about your own business, your own practice. Where are you strong? Are you strong in financial planning? Do you have a really good marketing function? Do you have an investment function within it? Different businesses have different processes. Do you have a passion within your business? You know, are you a B Corp? Do you believe in corporate and social responsibility? Whatever those issues are, because there are awards that align with those. Then the other thing I would say, do you want to go head to head with other people? Because some awards are awarded just for quality entrants. So I could think of, for instance, Incisive Media, they have something called the Gold Standard Awards. That's not a win or lose. If you meet the criteria, and it's a very demanding award with lots and lots of evidence required. But if you meet the standard, you would get an award. So more than one firm would win the Gold Standard Award for financial planning. So have a think about that. And then if you do like this, go up against other people, think about the categories within your own business, the disciplines within your business that you'd like to showcase. And then beyond that, don't just think financial services. Financial services is very good at giving out awards, and there's reasons for that. Publishers make quite a lot of money out of tables and selling sponsorship, etc. And they gather loads and loads of information that becomes a commodity for them. But if you have, for instance, a fantastic client education program or an education program for the children of your clients, think about going outside financial services for a consumer education award. There are other ways. Think about customer care, customer experience awards. Think about, if you really do like ESG, aren't there lots of awards right out there right at the moment for that whole subject matter? So have a real think about what you're trying to achieve. If you want an award for financial planning, obviously enter financial planning awards.
And Lee, when you entered awards at Investment Quorum, and I don't know whether you've done any at Octo or not.
We have.
How did your success in a year, if you won, inform your decision whether you entered again the following year? Or if you didn't win in a year, how would that affect your decision about whether to enter or not?
Okay, so the competitive nature I mentioned comes out here. If you don't win, there's no shame, because there are so many good financial planning firms. There's bound to be lots on this call. There is no shame in not winning. But what it does do is it gives you reflection. You think, okay, I've seen who's won that and I wanted to win that. What is it they're doing that I can find out in public record that would help me frame it for next year? It's not saying you corrupt your own process. You can't just change it. You constantly learn. It's the great thing for awards doing is learning. The other thing is, don't be afraid. And this, one of my biggest regrets when I first started entering awards back in the dark ages and started to, get shortlisted but not win, you used to get feedback. If you'd been shortlisted, you used to get written feedback from the judges. And that was incredibly useful. It's all gone now, unfortunately. But I still regularly take calls from people who know I've been on the judging panel, because most of the awards will say who the judges are. And I'm really happy to take calls with people and say, there were all sorts of reasons. Now, you don't give away anyone else's secret sauce, but you can certainly guide them and say, in section 2, the financials, you just seemed a bit weaker, or we could have done with more detail on X, that kind of stuff. And that's really useful. So the question about if I didn't win, would I re-enter? Yes, I would. And if I won, would I re-enter? Yes, I would. And the lovely thing, sounds so immodest, but this is what we're here to talk about. We became regular, consistent, consecutive year winners of several of the awards, because we took a huge pride in having won it, and we wanted to continue to win it. There's a danger in that, of course. You win it 2 or 3 times, it begins to look like a fit up. That's been left on me a couple of times.
Yeah, something we're battling with now. We were fortunate enough to design the websites, which won the Professional Advisor Award Best Website category the last 2 years. And do we get anyone to enter this year? So that was an interesting dilemma, but that's enough of the shameless plugs for our websites.
Yeah, another thing that struck me, Phil, is have a think about, the awards. You will know the ones that are massively entered. But some of the awards have less entries, so you may. And this is not to say it's not a shortcut. It's not a cheat, because even the ones with smaller numbers of entries tend to have very high quality entries. But there is less of a bun fight at the beginning to get into the long list and then the short list.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I think your tip about the judges was a fantastic tip as well. If you can track the judges down and approach them in the right way, then you're right. I think a lot of them will talk and will explain where maybe your entry could be improved. Second tip, and this might sound really obvious. I might sound like a school teacher telling a child how to do their GCSEs or their A-levels or whatever it is. But answer the question. So often when I've judged awards, the answer bears no relevance to the criteria or the question. And the people writing the entry are simply just trying to get across their key points, which is understandable, but they haven't carefully studied the criteria and the questions. So for me, I would be answering them specifically. In your entry, repeat the question back in your answer, so you make it really clear to the judges that we've read this criteria, we've read the questions, and we're answering it directly. If you can, use subheadings that are identical to the criteria and the questions. That's really important. You might take those out and change them to subheadings that show benefits, which we'll talk about in a bit. But using those subheadings to link them back to the criteria and the questions, I think, is another useful way of just showing to the judges that you have looked at the criteria and the questions. And then, if you can, work in your other key messages and evidence, which we'll come to in a second. And another little thing that I passionate believer in is that you've got to start each entry with a blank sheet of paper. Don't cut and paste from previous entries you've done. So don't cut and paste your, professional advisor entry into your money marketing entry, to give 2 examples, because the criteria is not going to be the same. And then the other thing I've seen is firms entering multiple categories in the same awards round, but copy and pasting the answers from one category into another. And it just shows that they don't really care that much. And as a judge, if they don't really care that much, should I be spending that much time reading the entry? So for me, never cut and paste. Start each entry with a blank sheet of paper and make sure you answer the criteria and the questions. It's so important you do that. And Lee, one of the things I wanted to ask you here is, how do you balance the criteria, answering the criteria and the questions, with getting your key messages in?
Okay, it's answer the question, basically. The key messages are, and I know that sometimes, well, very often, the awards are limited in word count and that kind of stuff. Never ever go over the word count. It annoys the judges hugely. Do an appendix or something, or appendices. That's the way around that. And judges don't mind appendices at all with supporting evidence. But follow the question, follow the format, answer the question that's being asked. It's a bit like, when you're at school doing exams. Answer the actual question. I think it's a great tip from you, Phil, about starting the answer with the question that's being asked, and that probably wouldn't be, a judge wouldn't care if that took you a few words over your word count, because it helps us. If you think, often you sit there on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea, with lots and lots of these, with paper strewn everywhere. I'm still not very good at reading everything on screen. I find it much easier to spit it out on the kitchen table. Being able to follow the answers in the way that they were set out by the awards process is definitely the way to do it.
Just wondering if that cup of tea turns into something a bit stronger as you work through the entries.
Well, Sunday afternoon it probably does.
Dan, talking of questions, I think there's one that's come in.
Yeah, so we have got a great question in from Kathy, and this goes back to one of the previous slides when we talked about which awards do you enter, and you mentioned perhaps some have got fewer entries. Kathy asks, what are those awards that have fewer entries?
Okay, thanks, Kathy. A great question, and thanks for posing it. Think about those that are available. Is there a marketing, for instance, is there a marketing or communications award for financial planning firms? They tend typically to get less, in my experience, they get less entries, because financial planning firms, they sort of focus on the financial planning bit. Is there an education award? In terms of specific awards, I mean, we were very successful with the platform awards, which are sponsored by Schroders. They tend to get, we won it 5 years in a row, our category, and I'm now a judge and have been for many years. They tend to get lower numbers of entries, although they're incredibly high quality. So just because there are lower numbers of entries, or doesn't mean to say it's easier to win, but it might be easier to get to the long list, short list. Those, I would think about education, about marketing, about PR activity, awards that you might be doing something in the community. Those tend to get less entries and maybe slightly easier to get into.
Thanks, Lee. It's great. Right, so moving on, number 3, and for me, this is probably the most important of the 8. We'll ask Lee whether he agrees in a second, but for me, it's probably the most important of the 8. And for me, entries should follow a pattern. You answer the question and make a claim, you provide evidence, and you repeat. And it's the evidence that for me is so important. I judged an award category for money marketing last year, and I can remember the entry that stood out was claim evidence, and it literally made the entry stand out so much, and also it meant that the claims that were being made were supported and were backed up. They weren't spurious claims with a best at, we've got market leading, etc. They weren't nebulous, spurious claims, but they were specific claims that were then backed up with evidence. And the evidence for them included testimonials, it included client survey results. It was really, really powerful, and you could see someone had really thought about how the entry was constructed. So for me, make a claim, provide evidence, and then repeat it. And some examples from the financial planning world. You claim your clients are delighted, then demonstrate that through social proof. That might be Google reviews, might be vouched for reviews, might be your client survey results. There's all sorts of things that you could put in there. And if you're growing and that's relevant to the award entry, the rate of growth, etc., then quote the numbers, be really specific. For me, I would be going to a couple of decimal points just to show that the answer is really, really specific. And as it says on the slide, just for me, without doubt, when I've been judging, the entries that have stood out have been those that have included evidence to support the claims. And I would go as far as to say, if you don't have any evidence, you've got to think really carefully about whether you make the claim in the entry. Lee, what would you add to that?
I can only really concur. The one thing that always strikes me is how many entries claim things like unique, unparalleled, etc., with nothing back up. With the best will in the world, financial planning businesses are all unique in their own way, but actually the process is less unique. So you've really got to think about the evidence when you make these kind of claims. But that shouldn't stop you being passionate about your business. And the one winning bit of sauce I would give right now is get the passion into the entry. Get the passion into the entry, but just back it up with evidence, as you said.
Thank you, Lee. And as we move on to number 4, it isn't just about what you say in the entry. For me, it's about how you present it. And as Lee alluded to earlier, being a judge isn't an easy thing. It's unpaid. You might get a seat at the ceremony, but it's generally unpaid. Yeah. The entries can be 1,000 to 2,000 words long, Lee, potentially. And a long list might have 10, 12 entrants in there. And then the judge may be judging more than one category. That's a lot of entries to read. And within the best will in the world, there is going to be an element of skim reading some of this stuff. So for me, we've got to make the entries to stand out. And we can learn a lot from good practice when it comes to writing blogs and articles and that sort of stuff. So for me, it's essential that you make your killer points stand out. Those points that you really want to hammer home to the judge have got to stand out. And great way of doing that, subheadings. Our content team are passionate about writing really good quality subheadings. And your subheadings should get your key points across. So test your entry. Can you, if the only thing that's read are the subheadings rather than the body content, does it get your killer points across? Don't ask yourself questions in the subheadings if you can avoid it. And change the subheadings so that you can show that you are answering the questions and the criteria, but also getting your killer points across. So if the judge just skimmed read it to start with, or if that's indeed all they do, make sure those subheadings have got the killer points. If you can get bullet points in, do that. It's not always the case that you can get bullet points in. Some of the online entry systems are a bit clunky and don't allow you to get bullet points in. Sometimes you can cut and paste them across from Word, but give it a go. But bullet points, I think, are useful. And then another way of getting your killer points in is use single line sentences. Single line sentences that stand out from the paragraph above and the paragraph below are really, really useful. A few other tips to make life easier: use short sentences and paragraphs. I was always told no more than 25 words in a sentence, no more than 3 sentences in a paragraph. You can probably, if it's an online entry, as all these are, you can probably reduce that even further. Make sentences really short. And write simply. You don't have to use flowery language to get your point across. So write simply and edit ruthlessly. You've only got so many words, and you want to use those words wisely. Each of those words should be used wisely. So avoid waffle, edit ruthlessly, and write simply, as well as making your killer points stand out with good subheadings, bullet points, and single line sentences. Lee, in terms of the structure of the entry, what makes your life easy as a judge when you're reading them?
Exactly as you've described. Short sentences, good bullet points. If you can't because of the formatting, and I'm the first, because judges struggle as much with the online systems as entrants, I think sometimes, Phil, and you'll be well aware of that. If you can't use bullet points, use an asterisk. There are ways of doing it. Just use a character. A thing that I got into a few years back when I was entering, because often it is very, very short, what you're trying to say. And this might sound a strange way to do it. What I started doing was putting some of my bullet points into a tweet on my system, because there was a character limit of whatever it is, 140 or whatever it was. I wouldn't publish the tweet, but it rather ruthlessly kept me to the word count. So, and the thing about Twitter is it allows you to go over the word count. Then you have to then you have to edit it down and edit it down and edit it down. And for those of you who are less confident, I found that a really, really good way to get things down into very, very punchy points. The other thing I do is I use Grammarly. I'm the product of a Scottish high school, which is kind of like a grammar school, but we still make mistakes, and I allow that to sort me out. But judges tend not to worry too much about grammar, I would say. But you know what? You're up against people who are entering who really do care about it. So just have a think about that. But that would be a top tip for me. Use Twitter as a way to limit your characters and to edit and polish it before you actually pull it through into your award entry.
That's a great idea. Dan, did I see a question for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Simon asks, similar question, apologies, but do you have a calendar you could share for the main industry awards?
Funnily enough, we do. On the Yardstick website, top right-hand corner, there is the Advisor Awards Index. And that is a really comprehensive list of the various awards that are open for entry. It's got closing dates on there. It's sortable in different ways. But that's the comprehensive list, I would suggest, of awards. If anybody on this webinar thinks we've missed something off, then please do let us know, because we want it to be as comprehensive as possible. It's updated every day with any entries and closing dates and that sort of stuff. So I would use that and keep coming back to it. Use it as a handy reference tool.
Yeah, and for anybody interested, Abby very generously has put a link to it in the chat function as well. So if anybody wants to click it, just to have it open and have a browse through.
Thank you, Abby.
It's a great resource. For those of you who've not seen it already, it's very, very comprehensive. It's well worth looking. So some of the questions earlier about awards you want to enter, it's well worth having a look through, checking out the websites and links and stuff on there. It's a bit of a plug for what you guys do, Phil, but it's really, really useful.
I'll take that. Thank you, Lee. So also, how do we next tip? How do we get to the final entry? And for me, every business is different. They've got to find a process that works for them. And every business is different, because there are businesses that are sole practitioners on this call. And I know there's businesses with maybe 10, 15, probably more people in the business. So you've got to find something that works for you. However, I'd suggest look at something along the following lines. So first thing, as we've said, review the criteria and the questions. Really important. As Lee said, there's no shame in not entering. If an award isn't for you because you don't think you can win, don't waste your time. Move on to the next. And if possible, if the business is big enough, form a team of relevant individuals to produce the response. And for me, the important word there is relevant. You don't want this to be a talking shop of lots of people involved just because they fancy an afternoon sat around a whiteboard brainstorming different things. So make sure those people are relevant. That team should then brainstorm the points they want to make. And each of those points should be analysed through that lens of the criteria and the questions. And then spend some time gathering evidence. So you've got 3 points that you want to make. Like, what evidence have we got to be able to support those claims? Now, some of that evidence you might already have. So, for example, if you're one of our clients, you've probably got a load of Google reviews, voucher reviews, client survey results, video testimonials. So that can prove client satisfaction, for example. But gather the evidence. And if the entry period is long enough and you are organised enough that the brainstorm happens at the start of the process, you might be able to go off and gather some evidence. For me, then, one person should write the entry. And that can be somebody internal, or it could be someone external who has managed the brainstorming process. The team then reviews the first draft, iterates it and changes it together. And then finally, it's edited by somebody who didn't write it, ideally. Very difficult to edit your own work. And then it should be proofed by a third person, ideally, who is different from the author and different from the editor. Again, I think that process works. I've seen it work really well. There is an alternative, of course. You can outsource it. You can outsource it to agencies like us. But even then, and we were discussing this with Lee before we started the webinar, I think it's really important that whilst the writing can be outsourced, I don't think the brainstorming can. And I think the brainstorming process needs to be done internally or curated by somebody externally. I don't think the whole process, I don't think you just hand over a blank entry and expect a winning entry to come back. Lee, what would you add there?
This is quite a comprehensive process. It's not one that I particularly followed because I did all of our award entries, but this makes a lot of sense to me. The thing I would say is a bit like I'm a huge advocate for having a brand champion. You know, someone in the business that is so passionate about the brand and everything it does internally and externally with clients. It's a bit the same with the awards because it just fits into that. So somebody has to take ownership of the award entry. Absolutely. Someone's got to lead that project team or do that submission. The thing I would say about, and this is what we were talking about before we went on air, I absolutely see the value of having external people help. I do. And actually I've helped in awards that I'm not a judge, I would say. I've helped teams put award submissions together. But you've got to get the passion in. So you cannot expect, as Phil says, to say, we want to enter, I don't know, the Money Marketing Awards, go and write my entry. You've got to be involved in the process. You've got to get your passion through. As I said earlier, the secret sauce in any award entry is when as a judge, in the middle of a judging session, it makes you smile. You think, my God, these people love their business and love their clients. That's the secret sauce. And external writers can help you frame that. They don't work in your business. So yes, absolutely.
And just to answer your question, Avril, that I've seen come in, yes, we absolutely do help firms write award entries. We do need a lot of input from the firm themselves, because as Lee says, to get that passion across. But we help firms craft entries. We can write, we can edit if they've already written it, and obviously we can help build the proof that is necessary to support your claims. So this next one's pretty straightforward, but again, so a lot of firms don't do it. So getting the basics right. We obviously got to hit the word count, and it's a bit of a risk exceeding the word count. And I noticed on the Professional Advisor award entry system when they closed maybe 3 weeks ago, there was you couldn't go past the 500 words to 200 words or whatever it was that you were allocated. And to be honest, I think the system might have been a little bit under as well. It read 500 words in Word when we cut and paste it in, but it was a few over. So something's gone slightly wrong there. But for me, don't take a risk by exceeding the word count. And edit it ruthlessly, because that makes claims, makes space, I say, for your claims and your evidence. Every word counts, and every word's got to be working really quite hard. And as Lee said earlier, most awards now seem to allow you to attach supporting documents, appendices and that sort of stuff, whether they're PDFs or Word documents. So make use of those as well. Lee, I don't know how judges feel about those supporting documents.
We're pretty happy with them. In fact, I would say we like them a lot. They help frame what are often, because of the word count limits, they can be a little bit dry at times. So they really help flesh out. If someone says in a bullet point, we've produced a fantastic client newsletter, if there's an example of it in the appendices, we'll go and look at it, absolutely.
Okay. And again, don't be late. And that means planning ahead. Trying not to write entries last minute. And the process always takes longer than you think. Yeah. It genuinely does.
Yeah, we spot the last minute ones quite easily, and it does take much longer than you think. I know that from having entered so many of them. So give yourself plenty of time, and don't, because if you're up against it, judges don't like when people get extensions, and often the organisers will say, we've given these 3 firms an extension because they've entered before and that kind of stuff. Somehow it just sets you thinking, well, everyone else had the courtesy to get their stuff on time. And the other thing judges do, and this is a tip, if you're writing a paragraph or an answer, front end the paragraph with the best bit of it, because if you go over the word count, and I do this, I redline everything from the word count. So if your best bit is at the end of a paragraph and you've gone over, you didn't count, I redline it, and I'm not the only judge that does that.
I think front loading your sentences is another great tip that could have been on one of the previous slides, actually, when I was talking about subheadings, bullet points, short sentences. Putting your killer point, your key point at the start of a sentence or the start of a paragraph means if somebody is skimming reading it, they're more likely to see it. So it's a great tip there. Right, moving on. Again, this for me, number 7, flows back to the evidence point. And when I've been judging awards, I've always put much more store in claims that people have achieved rather than what they might do in the future. So generally speaking, awards are backward looking, or at least are current. And for me, I'm far more interested in the judge as what somebody has achieved rather than what they might do in the future. So if your entry is full of planning to implement, we're working towards, we intend to do, we're going to, for me, it's probably a signal that either you've got this entry wrong and you need to go back to the drawing board or rewrite it, or you might be a year too early. Come back next year when you've done these things. Lee, what would you say to that?
Okay, I'm going to be contrary there, because some awards will ask for your future plans. So obviously that's easy. So Phil, that's not to trip you up there. The other thing though is if you're starting to enter awards and you're fairly new at it and you know you're not ready, there is no harm in going through the discipline because there is no shame in not winning. Go through the discipline, write it up as you would like it to be, submit it, and if it doesn't get anywhere, it doesn't matter. You've gone through the process and you've benchmarked yourself with how long it takes to do it. And I think you'd be surprised how long it does.
Yeah, it takes a long time to write these things. Lee, do you think that if you are putting down a bit of a mark with an award, let's say you are a year early, is it the case that it's the same judges year after year on a category, and therefore they might remember it from the previous year? Or am I overthinking that?
There tends to be a judges circuit, Phil. We've run into each other in judgely chambers and that kind of stuff. They do rotate in and out because some people, they move on, they get fed up doing them, or they get moved to another category or something. But actually, I remember, I do remember many firms that I've seen year after year. Some win, some get shortlisted, etc. And I think there is something in that. And bear in mind, judges never criticize good entries, even if they're not ready yet. They think, do you know what, that was a really strong effort, but they're just a bit too early. It won't be held against you.
And of course, if you even if you don't win, there's often a highly commended, runners up, that sort of thing. So that's there's mileage in that as well with some awards, isn't it?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? On your website, if you're going to do it, and I know we're coming to this, but if you've been shortlisted, or you've got highly commended or commended, that's a good graphic for your website or a good blog post or a good social media post because you've been shortlisted. Of all the financial planning firms in the UK, all right, those who entered, but your clients and your potential clients don't know how many entered or how many people do enter year on year. It's another nice thing to say that we wish to be benchmarked amongst our peers, and we're incredibly pleased that in our first time of entering, we were shortlisted. It's a strong blog post.
Absolutely, 100% it is. Right, moving on to the final of the 8. Again, for me, this is incredibly important. We've got a 14-strong content team here, so it would be. Editing. Editing is different to proofing. Editing will help you take out words that you don't need. It'll therefore make space for your killer points. A well-edited entry is easier for the judges to read. As I say, it helps your killer points shine through. And it just creates that space to get them in there. I thought Lee's point was really interesting about over the word count, red line. Yeah. Now, if the entry had been edited more ruthlessly, there may have been space for those points to have been made. And then again, proofing, get somebody else to proof it. If you can't, because you're a sole practitioner firm, then a couple of tricks: print out your entry. It is easier to, you will find more typos and grammatical areas and opportunities to improve the language if you print it and then start red penning it yourself. If for any reason you can't print it and you're trying to proof it on a screen, then change the font size, change the color, but just change it so that your eyes think they're looking at a new document rather than the existing document. It really does make a massive difference. Lee, when you're judging, Lee, how do you view typos and poor grammar and that sort of stuff?
Okay, I think most judges aren't too bothered about grammar. We're moving into a different age, but actually so many of the entrants are so well put together. Why take the risk of having poor grammar and typos and things? The other thing I would suggest, Microsoft, most of us are in the Microsoft ecosystem, perhaps you're not, Phil, because you're on the creative end. Microsoft Word will actually read your document to you. So have Word read your entry to you, because it's another way of spotting things that don't sound right. That's another little tip I learned 2 or 3 years back, which I always do. But grammars and typos, listen, they're okay, but why run the risk of doing them? There are enough, Grammarly is free, use the free one. There are others, there's Hemingway, there's all these tools now that will allow you to, if you're not using the excellent service that you guys provide. But even if you are, just double check.
100%, yeah, 100%. So those are the 8 tips, and Lee's added at least double that as we've worked through those. Just want to focus for a minute, and we've covered some of this already, about things that annoy judges. So we talked about the entries with poor grammar and typos. I think my view is if I saw an entry with typos, it would make a difference to how I viewed it. Claims without evidence, really important. Claim, evidence, rinse and repeat. I think poor category selection. I've looked at entries where clearly, and maybe you can argue that it shouldn't have made it onto the long list. But I've looked at entries where you're thinking, why have you entered this category? There was obviously a different category that would have made more sense. Notwithstanding Lee's really good point earlier, promises of future accomplishments. I'm more likely to positively on an entry where they're saying what they've done rather than what they're going to do, albeit accept that there's value in the process. And then lastly, we've talked a lot about written entries, but obviously some awards, you've got the written entry, and then to get you onto the long list, that goes down to a short list, and then there's interviews. Money marketing, for example, a lot of their categories, there are interviews. And one of the things that annoyed me as a judge when I was judging those was entrants that were sat there using their 10 minutes up, but didn't answer the questions that they were being asked. And it goes back to one of the earlier slides. If someone asks you a question, they want to know the answer. The judge wants to know the answer, and you need to give them the answer. Lee, what would you add to that list? Is there anything that we've missed off or not covered?
Yeah, for financial planners particularly, if there are calculations involved, get them right. Many of us know Rory Percival. He's often sat in the judgely chamber with me. He is ruthless in his calculations, quite rightly. So I would say absolutely have a think about that. The other one is this lack of passion, where it's kind of pretty obvious it's been handed to someone last minute. Get the answers down, get it in, because we're up against the deadline. So unless you're passionate about your business, why would you expect a judge to be passionate about your award? Those are the 2 big ones. I know we're beginning to head towards the end of the webinar, but those are the other 2 that I would definitely add.
Thanks, Lee. I think what we're going to do is we're going to plow on to the end of the slides to 11 o'clock, and then Lee, if you're okay, we'll hang around and answer all the questions if that's okay.
Yeah.
Where do we go next? Well, we go next to awards that are worth entering. So for me, when we're talking to firms, I would tend to prioritise those 5 that are on the screen. There are clearly others that are important, but time is for a lot of firms at a premium, and those are the ones that I would ultimately prioritise. I think Lee made some really good points earlier about some categories are maybe less competitive, so you might want to think about the categories. And other awards are potentially less competitive, so they're definitely worth adding in there. And I would avoid what did you call them, Lee? Award farms. Award factories,
Yeah,
award farms.
Yeah, it's my phrase for them. They just pump out email after email to firms saying, we've specially selected you to win Game Maker of the Year or Financial Planning of the Year or whatever. You can spot them. It might be worth you doing a list of the bad ones, Phil, as well as the good ones, at some stage, just to give you even more work for your index.
I might ring the lawyers before I do that. But for me, I think those 5 are really important. And as we said earlier, there's a full list available on the Advisor Award Index. In the follow-up that we send out, we'll include the link there as well.
I'd add a couple in there, Phil. Definitely the gold standards
Okay.
awards for financial planning. Definitely. I would definitely also think about, for those of you at more at the wealth management end of what you do, have a think about Spears. Very, very high quality. And I saw a question earlier about the Oscars. They claim to be the Oscars of wealth management. That worth a look. And the Platform Awards, sponsored by Schroders. If you see some of the winners, we were lucky enough to win, as I say, but some really high quality. You put yourself in their company, it's a really good thing for your business. So I'd add those in, but I see what you're doing with this list. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. So your entry's done. You've pitched up to the ceremony, bought one ticket. You've got your reward and you've won, or before that, you've been shortlisted. What are the things you should do to really capitalize on your success? A first thing to do is, for me, is claim your winners package. Now, this is quite controversial because some awards will give the winners package, which is generally maybe a trophy and a little badge. They'll give that for free. Others will give the shortlisted for free and charge for the winner. Every award is slightly different, and every award offers different assets as well. For me, if it is a paid-for package, I would be inclined to negotiate really hard. If you've won, they can't go anywhere else. You're the only person that can buy that. So you do hold some cards when it comes to negotiating. But Lee, what would you say when it comes to claiming your package, paying for it, not paying for it, etc.? What tips would you give there?
Oh, well, I'd start with your last one. Negotiate. If you've won or been highly commended, you're the only one in that category. So negotiate. You got to be aware of the commercials. It costs a lot of money to put these on for the publisher. They're typically run by publishers, not always, not exclusively, but they're typically run by publishers. They put a big event on, they get sponsorship, they sell tables, they sell logos and awards. That's their commercial model. But do negotiate, absolutely, each and every time. I'm Scottish, I hate paying full price for anything. So I would say absolutely start there, and build that into your marketing plan. If you're going to enter awards and you end up being successful, you've got to build the cost of all of this into your marketing and brand plan. And Phil, I'm sure you help your clients with this, because it's that strange thing of the more successful you get, the more expensive it gets. I would be really wary of some of these big long lists where they try and sell you a kind of long listy type logo. I'm not sure the value of those, and some of the long lists are getting longer and longer and longer and longer because the publishers haven't been able to have these physical events of late. So I guess they're making money back that way. It's not to knock them. I still believe in what they do and they're supporting the sector and the profession, but be careful of these huge long lists. And actually, some of the short lists aren't very short now either. So just be careful of that. Are you just in some sausage machine where they're making money out of it?
Yeah, good stuff, Lee. Thank you. So what else would we be doing? Well, the obvious thing to do is update your website. As we all know, your website is your shop window. It's where prospective clients start to get to know you. It's where existing clients partly validate decisions to work with you. And it's where those prospective clients as well decide whether you are the right financial advisor or planner for them. So awards, as Lee says, act as a brand amplifier, and also an indicator, a trust indicator, increases the trust prospective clients might have in your firm. So for me, if you're a multi-award winner, it's things such as award sliders on key pages, put them on your team page, your Why Choose Us page, contact page, another one. Build an awards page out as well. It's important you do both. Our research shows that only about 1% of people visit testimonial pages. It might be fairly similar on awards. So that means you've got to scatter them around your site so people see them incidentally to your browsing. And that awards page, when you've got the logos on there and the badges, give some context for each award if you can, and link the badge to the blog that you've written. We'll come to that in a minute. But link the badge to the blog to give it even more context and explain the win. One thing I would say is you've got to spend some time on the design. Award logos are all different shapes and sizes. Some are square, some are oblong, some are landscape, some are portrait. Dan, who works in branding, wrestles with them on a regular basis. Is your role of head of branding, and you've got to be really careful with them. So for me, it's important that the website is updated. And as I said, those awards logos should be linked to a blog. And for me, write a blog when you're shortlisted, because there's value in that, and write a blog when you win. And the blog should explain really 5 things. Explain what's happened, detail the process you went through, explain why you're delighted to have been shortlisted or won, get that passion across that Lee talks about. And if they're available, include the judges' comments. Some of the awards, I remember when one of our clients won the Money Marketing Award in 2019. Yeah, it was face-to-face pre-COVID, so 2019. The judges made some lovely comments, and they used those in their marketing in the blog and all sorts of places. And then, of course, include relevant images. Sorry, Lee, you were saying.
Sorry, I thought you'd stop there. You will find that mostly at the end of the judging, when we've chosen the winners, we're asked collectively to come up with a kind of little short pithy sentence about that winning entry and why it won. They're usually available if you ask for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And really worth putting in there. Add some context and some colour. And then, of course, you want to announce your success by email. And for me, there are a couple of occasions to do that. Do it when you're shortlisted to create some anticipation. And do it when you, if you do it when you win. And for me, that's a one-off email. Don't put it in your newsletter. This is too special to hide away in your newsletter against other articles. I would put it in a one-off email, sent at a different time of the day and a different day of the week to the one you normally send your newsletter. Maybe the day after the awards ceremony. But send it out in a one-off email. And of course, that should go to as wide an audience as possible. Clients, prospects, professional connections, etc., etc. And obviously, you need to put it on social media as well. Announce your shortlisting when you're shortlisted. Some of them, you just need to check when you can announce it, because it tends to be shortlisted, maybe announced before you can start talking about it. The news is embargoed. So do check when you can announce it. But announce your shortlisting. Post on the day of the announcement, the day of the awards ceremony. So posts there, building up to the ceremony. You guys getting ready, black tie on, whatever it is. Post immediately after the announcement too. You've walked back from picking up your trophy from some kind of B-list comedian that's awarded you the trophy. You sat back down, take a picture of it and put it out on social at that point. Doesn't stop you doing the blogs and that sort of stuff in the future. Just that moment, capturing that moment when you've won, it really is really quite special. And then, of course, follow-up posts on your key social channels, linking back to the articles and blogs that you've done. And always, always, always include images to when you're putting those social posts out.
Phil, just a quick point there, just a tip. Get permission. If you're using official photographs, get permission. Some of the publishers are really quite touchy about using, and if you're negotiating your winners package, get that in there. Say, I'd like the images of me and some of the B-roll shots of the night as part of my winners package.
Good tip, thank you, Lee. And then update the basics. So your social media banners. Every Twitter account, LinkedIn account, whether it's personal and corporate, Facebook account has a banner on them. And everybody who hits your social media channel, whichever one it is, will see that banner. It's really important online real estate. And that banner should have 4 things in it. You have your logo, it should have what you do and who you do it for, so a sentence just explaining that. You have your contact details, and it should have some social proof. So if you go and look at the Yardstick banner, it's got our Google reviews on there. If you've won an award, you get your little logo. Update your social media banners, keep them constant. Email footers, update your email footers with the award. Directory profiles and newsletter templates, things that people see on a regular basis. Update with your latest award success. And you can produce a list of those. You can absolutely produce a list of those that you go to as and when you win an award or indeed you're shortlisted. But really important we get those basics done. And then finally, and absolutely not least, is celebrate. Your success of writing the award is not only a team effort from those people who are involved in writing it, but those people who made your business a winning business. So important that you get the team involved and you celebrate that success. It validates their work, it validates your work. And for me, something that we've said at Yardstick before, you enter as a team and then you celebrate as a team. Lee, when you've won awards, how have you celebrated?
Long and hard, and often way long into the night, as you very well know. So that's a great question. Yeah, no, listen, celebrate as a team. The other tip I'd give, we often used to bring our top referring professional connection along to the award ceremony, because they were typically from law or accountancy or tax, and they would be used to their own awards, so they're very used to what goes on, etc. But it's a way of showcasing the good in the industry and the profession, sorry, and what you've done as a team, whether you win or get, if you've been shortlisted, that's an achievement in itself, and they rather like coming along quite often.
Great idea, great idea. So we're going to get to your questions in about 30 seconds. So a few things, the ways we can help. Yardstick, we can help with outsourced entry writing. We do want it to be a collaborative process. We can't magic an entry out of thin air, so we do need it to be a collaborative process. But we can certainly help with writing, editing, proofing, and giving you that external body to be able to bounce things off. We've got the Advisor Award Index, we've talked about that, and then we've got a couple of free checklists: how to prepare an effective award entry, and 8 ways to capitalise on your award success. We'll put both those checklists in the follow-up. If you want to stay in touch with us, there's our details. But more importantly, because of his contribution today, I just want to say thank you to Lee. And there are Lee's contact details at Opto members, LinkedIn and Twitter. And again, we'll put those in the follow-up email. So just want to say thank you to Lee. For everybody who wants to stick around and listen to more of Lee's insights, which have been hugely valuable. I'm going to take the screen share off. I'm going to hand over to Dan, and we'll do some questions now.
Perfect. So we've got quite a few questions coming in, actually, and they're brilliant questions. I'm going to start with 2 questions that are saying very similar things. We're asking very similar things. So Avril says, I have been very skeptical about awards because they are sponsored by industry, not consumer brands. So do clients really care about them? And then Philip says, does it make any difference which award you win, since most clients don't really know the difference between Citywire or Money Marketing, etc.? So I'm keen to hear Leah's thoughts, and then also keen to hear Phil's thoughts on that.
I take the point. I don't think clients care they've been sponsored by consumer brands. The X Award sponsored by Aviva or something. I don't think clients worry too much about that. In terms of the hierarchy of awards, I think also clients are less aware. But if they Google your award, and some will, particularly analytical clients, and they see a lot of good stuff by a Citywire award or a Money Marketing award, and less so about others, for instance, then that may help. But I think it comes down to what you want to do. It's more about you promoting your willingness to be measured amongst your peer group.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Lee. I'll just extend it to say, I think, clients won't know Money Factor, Money Marketing, FT Advisor from Professional Advisor. But I think that's why it's so important to put some context to it, and be talking about the process you went through, why it's important to your business, the judging process as well, and giving that context rather than just saying we've won this award, here's our shiny new logo. And I've spoken to award winners, and we've had a lot of clients who have won awards, and they absolutely do resonate with consumers. If it's promoted and publicised correctly, they absolutely do resonate. Back to you, Dan.
Brilliant. So next question is in from Richard, who asks, if you do get to the interview stage, who should attend? Is it the first person who originally wrote that entry, a director? Who goes? Lee,
you go with that first.
I would say the award champion. I said earlier that I believe there should be a brand champion, and part of that is the award champion. They might be different people, but typically they're not. And I understand lots of firms are sole practitioners and very, very small. I would say the person who signed off the entry eventually as fit for entering, they should go along because they know it intricately. And I've sat in enough judging chambers where someone's been thrown a hospital pass in rugby terms. They turn up, clutching it in their sweaty palm, not really very happy at being there, or feeling it's all happened very last minute. Sometimes it happens because they were ill, the person was ill, but quite often it's been thrown at them. They turn up and they just don't get it across well enough. What was a really good entry that got them shortlisted fails at the final hurdle because someone turned up that wasn't as au fait with it, or just they couldn't get the passion across that the original author had signed it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I've sat in a judging panel before, and I remember the first 9 o'clock, first person coming in to present and be interviewed. His first line was, "I didn't know I was doing a presentation today," and it just kind of went downhill from there. So I completely agree with you. They've got to know. They've got to know the entry and their business inside out.
And listen, judges have egos too. Judges have egos. So even those who think we're quite modest, one thing we didn't touch on is humility after you've won an award. Be humble. You know, it is wafer thin often at that end when you win. And sometimes the winners, but judges have egos too. And poor someone turns up and starts with, "Well, I didn't know I was doing this." And if the judges think, "Hang on, the business, I thought you were taking this seriously."
Completely agree. Back to you, Dan.
Okay, I'm going to ask a difficult question now. So Philip says, if you had to pick just one award to win, which would it be? Which is the most prestigious? What a question. I suppose prestige and the right award for you are two different things, aren't they?
They are. And I would say it goes back to what I was saying about what part of your business are you trying to showcase? Is it the financial planning part? Is it the customer experience part? Is it the education part? Is it the wealth management end if you're that type of business? For me, the most prestigious one I ever won, in my opinion, was I won Wealth Manager of the Year from Spears. And I come from a financial planning background, and I managed to march into the wealth management space and win their prestigious award. But I would say any on Phil's list are great awards to win. I would add Gold Standard Awards, Money Marketing. I don't know if they still hand out that gold bar. It was fantastic. I entered about 8 times, got shortlisted 3 times, and eventually won it. And it took masses of work. And I used to run into David Crozier and Dennis Taylor and all these other people, you know, waiting to go in to be judged. And I thought, I'm so proud to be in the same kind of room as these guys before we go in. So pick the one for your business. But I would say anything from Citywire, Incisive, Last Word, whatever Last Word's called now, Spears. But think about the type of award you want to win.
Back to you.
Thank you. So before I read the next question out, a point from Scott that came in, it goes back to negotiating when you've won. Scott says, beware that some award packages limit how long you can use the winner's logos for. We've always negotiated an open-ended contract if paying for the winner's logo.
I personally, I wouldn't stand for that. If I was going to part with hard-earned cash, which could go somewhere else in my business or to people in my business, I wouldn't like time-limited award rule. It was only ever once put to me, and I gave them pretty short shrift, and we got to keep it. It's part of your negotiation. Be pleasant about it, but just don't stand. Brilliant.
You've heard it here. Don't stand for it. So
that's nothing to do with the judging, by the way. That's the award organizer. I just will not stand for that.
Brilliant. So got a question here from Mike, and this is around word count. So what criteria is used to set the word count for each question? And should you always plan to use the full word count?
I don't know what the criteria is, because that typically doesn't come from the judges either. It comes from the organisers. I'm not fussed if a word count doesn't meet. If it's 500 words that you're allowed in that particular section and you submit 400, I personally don't care. In fact, it makes my life slightly easier. But make sure those 400 words count. Don't waffle within as Phil rightly said, ruthlessly edit, take out all the fluff words. I'm guilty of writing the way I speak. So there's a lot of flummery that Grammarly takes it out.
Perfect. Right. So a question in from Paul, and this again goes back to negotiation. So how much typically could be discounted, or would they consider as reasonable to ask for? as we were quoted 5K for a winner's logo once for an award. We were lucky enough to win from a major awards within the industry. Yeah, how much discount do we ask for? I think that's the question, isn't it?
What have you seen, Lee? I've maybe seen maybe a third off, 50% off, but something in that region.
Yeah, I think once I got 50% off, but that was a lot of hard work, and I laid it on thick. I was a judge on some awards in a different area that they did. I would say if you get 25 to 30% off, you're doing well. It may be harder at the moment because they've not been able to have these live events and sell tables and things, so maybe they're a bit tougher on it.
Back to you, Dan.
Perfect. So, question in from Mike: how long should you keep publicising an award that you've been shortlisted for and then subsequently won?
I'll take that one, Lee, to start with, if that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say that you publicise the shortlist until the event, till it's announced, the winner is announced for me. After the event, I would be doing something immediately that day, the event, and maybe the following morning. Then something more considered with your blog, and then the single piece of communication that's going out. I think that then goes back to Lee's point about being humble. For me, I would then probably not do that much more. Maybe a few more social posts. But I wouldn't necessarily do that much more than try and stay humble. Lee, what's your view?
Well, there's a couple of quick wins there, isn't there, that you'll be aware of. You could have a link in your footer in your emails to your awards page. You could have the same in a newsletter down in the footer somewhere. There's other ways of doing it. Have an awards page on your website. There's sort of ways of doing that. But you're right. If you won a gold standard in 1997, there's no point still banging on about it. So. Yeah,
there's plenty you can do, like you say, Lee, just making sure it stays in people's consciousness without shouting it from the rooftops, the social banners, the email address, etc. And I think I would do, like I said, those social posts, then a one-off communication, and then probably pause it from there.
We used to put award logos on our, these roll-up banners we had at our client events and stuff. There's all sorts of.
Okay, so unless anybody tells me differently, okay, no, somebody has told me differently. One question in from Kathy just now. To build on the question about how long to promote a win, how long do you keep those logos on your footer/website? How long after is too long? 2 years? Is that too long?
I think, no, I agree with Lee shaking his head. I agree. I think if you're putting them on your website, you should be building up a pattern of success. So shortlisted in 2020, won in 2021, retained it in 2022, for example. I wouldn't be replacing the 2021 logo with the 22 logo. I would be building up that pattern of success to show consistency of quality. That's easy enough on the website. On email signatures, your email signature, if you're successful as Lee, will go yay long. So I think I'd probably be a bit careful of that. But on websites, I would just keep building. Lee, what would you say there?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we kept every logo on, but we built it up by year. And the thing that, because I said earlier, we won some awards. We were lucky enough to win some awards consecutively. It builds a nice picture for your client. You're committed to excellence year after year, and it wasn't a fluke. 3 years ago.
Thank you, Lee.
Okay, so let's have one final question, and this is from Isabel, and we haven't paid her to ask this question, I promise. In terms of working with a marketing company to outsource the award entry, what is the best way to work together? How does it look?
I think that there's a couple of ways of doing that with us. The first is that the advice firm themselves follows that process that I outlined earlier, and then we leap in, review the entry, edit, suggest improvements. So we come in after the first draft has been written, and as I say, act as that critical friend, maybe talk about where we can get more evidence in, edit and proof, and really knock it into shape. So that's the first way of doing it. The second way is where we would interview the relevant individuals on the brainstorming panel, and write the entry from that. So we're getting involved a little bit earlier at that point, but it's absolutely essential that it is a combined effort. We can't turn a blank entry form into a winning entry with no input from the firm. So those are the two ways of working with us to do that.
Right, we do have one more. Have we got time for one more?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay, right. Last orders. So just posting a question from earlier. Okay, so Moneyfacts Awards, as an example, have a really long shortlist. You then have to pay to attend this award ceremony, but the chance of winning is low because of such a long shortlist. Is this just a money-making thing?
Okay, I would say shortlists should be short. Phil may have his own views. I'd be really interested. I never entered Moneyfacts Awards. It wasn't where I wanted to position my business. I'm not saying we didn't use Moneyfacts around the office from time to time, but it wasn't really what we did. So I never entered them. So I don't have much. Every awards ceremony, every awards process, will seek to make money from anyone. They sell tables, they sell awards, they gather data. All these questions they ask you get packaged up into. There's all sorts of ways that I don't even know that people make money out of it. But I'd be very wary of those that charge you to attend a ceremony and with big, long shortlists. I'm just not convinced that that's the quality I wanted my firm, I'd rather reflect a quality award with short lists, with high quality entrants, where I could negotiate the pricing. I didn't have to pay just to go to the awards. I'm not saying I never paid to go to awards. I did, and we used to take tables sometimes, take the whole team and professional connections, as I said. But to answer that specific question, I'd be quite wary of that.
I agree with you, Lee. I think shortlist needs to be short. I can see why they're longer now. I also think social media's got a part to play as to why they're a bit longer, because you stick 20 people on a shortlist, that's 20 people who are going to tweet, post on LinkedIn about being on the shortlist. So it creates more noise around the award. So I'm with you. I think shortlist should be short.
I mean, there are a lot more awards around now as well. I mean, back in the day, there was a question for me much earlier on about which ones would you enter. There wasn't that many around, so it was a fairly simple choice. You could enter all of them or just a few of them. But now there are so many that I don't envy the task sometimes of judging which one to go in, and they're very niche at times as well.
Right, Dan, are we done for the questions?
Yeah, let's draw the line there. It's I think many of the other questions in the list are just repeats of what we've already covered. So yeah, I'm happy that we've covered everything.
Well, good luck everyone with your entries.
Likewise. And Lee, thank you for being here today. That's the longest we've ever gone on with questions, so that's a good thing. Yeah, really pleased with that. So Lee, thank you so much for your input today. It's been fabulous, and I much appreciate it. Dan, thank you as always. We'll be back on the 9th of March with our latest recommendation workshop webinar. We'll put a link in to the show notes and the follow-up email. And on the 16th of March, we've got the usual free webinar, and we're going to do another controversial topic. We're going to do LinkedIn. We're going to do the things that advisors and planners can do to get the best out of LinkedIn. So we've done awards. That's one controversial topic. We'll do LinkedIn next time. May have an easier life in April. Once again, thank you, Lee. It's been a pleasure. Dan, thank you as always. See you soon, everybody. Thank you.
Brilliant. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Good luck, everyone.